I never thought a Monday morning could feel like the calm before a storm. But there I was, Shaniqua, walking through the glass doors of Haventich's downtown headquarters, my heels clicking against the marble floor, tie straight, blazer sharp, and heart hammering like a snare drum. 10 years. 10 years of climbing cubicle walls, of late nights debugging code while the rest of the office slept, of swallowing injustice with a polite smile. 10 years, and I still had to prove myself every single day. The lobby smelled of fresh coffee and polished ambition. Everyone was here, pretending to be awake, scrolling on phones, nodding at the security guard as if that was all the connection they needed. I passed by familiar faces, some friendly nods, some thinly veiled glares, but I kept my eyes forward. I had learned early on that the world rewarded focus more than friendliness. In my office, a small corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows, I dropped my bag and sank into my chair. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, a reminder of all I had sacrificed. I thought about my mother's voice from years ago. Shaniqua, you were born to make waves, not wait for permission. Those words had been my compass through every corporate storm I'd survived. They were louder than any voice in the boardroom, louder than the whispers of colleagues who doubted me, louder than the smirks of men who assumed they belonged at the top. By mid-morning, my inbox was flooded with the usual meeting requests, reports, passive-aggressive feedback from managers who mistook politeness for weakness. But today, one email stood out, a single line from someone I barely recognized. Meet me in conference room B urgent. Confidential. My pulse quickened. Confidential, in corporate code usually meant trouble, or opportunity. I made my way down the sterile hallway, eyes scanning, mind racing. Conference room B smelled faintly of sanitizer and anxiety. Inside, I found Marcus Hale, the VP of Operations, sweating like he had just run a mile. His tie was crooked, his smile tight. Shaniqua, he started, voice clipped. I'll get straight to it. We've received a complaint. Allegations against your project team. There's been misconduct. I sat down, keeping my expression neutral. My mind, however, was spinning. Misconduct? My team? I had spent months guiding them, mentoring them, protecting them from office politics that wanted to chew us alive. I see, I said carefully. Do you have specifics? Marcus shifted in his seat, avoiding my eyes. Not yet. HR is reviewing, but I wanted to give you a heads up. A heads up, right, a polite way of saying, brace yourself, because the wolves are coming. I smiled, just slightly, enough to let him think he had unsettled me. Inside, a storm was already brewing. I returned to my office, sat at my desk, and let the silence fill the space. Then I pulled out my notebook, a habit from my early years. When dreams felt safer inked on paper than whispered aloud, I wrote, Step 1. Gather facts. Step 2. Protect the team. Step 3. Find the source. Simple, clinical, efficient. I thrived in order. Chaos only scared the unprepared. By lunch, whispers were already circulating. Shaniqua's team under investigation. Did you hear what happened? I always knew there was tension there. I walked past, nodding politely, letting the rumors wash over me. My pulse didn't quicken. I had learned to carry my own calm like armor. Later, in the quiet of my office, I replayed every interaction from the past week. A misfiled report, an overheard conversation in the cafeteria, a sudden shift in tone from our. Nothing obvious, nothing I could call concrete. But intuition has a way of sharpening in times of trial. And mine was screaming. Someone was setting me up. But why? And how? The afternoon stretched long. I went over every email, every meeting note, every Slack message. Patterns emerged, not mistakes, not coincidences. Deliberate. Someone wanted to see me fail. But I wasn't built to fail quietly. By 4:30, the office emptied enough for me to breathe, but not enough for me to feel safe. I leaned back in my chair, hands behind my head, staring at the ceiling, thinking. I thought about my grandmother's kitchen, the smell of Sunday dinner, the sound of her laughter. Keep going, baby, you were made for this. That voice, that history, that culture, it wasn't a footnote. It was fuel. And then it hit me, the first move. Not reactive, but proactive. If they wanted war, I'd give them strategy. If they thought I would crumble, they were wrong. I began drafting an email. Each word precise. A shield for my team. A signal to those who underestimated me. We see you. We are prepared. We will not fall. As the sun dipped behind the skyscrapers, casting golden light across the city, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: anticipation. The kind that tingles under your skin. The kind that whispers, "This is your moment." I knew the days ahead would test every skill, every relationship, every ounce of resolve I had. But I also knew this: no one writes my story but me. And to anyone out there who's ever been doubted, underestimated, or set up to fail, stand up, speak loud, and claim your space. Because the world isn't waiting to see if you survive, it's waiting to see if you rise. Like if you stand for fairness. Share to empower your community. Comment your story. Let's rise together. The office was quieter than usual on Tuesday morning. But quiet in Haven Tech meant tension, not peace. I could feel it in the air, the subtle glances, the careful pauses mid-sentence, the way the elevators seemed to move slower, as if carrying secrets. I passed the break room and caught a glimpse of my team huddled. Heads low. They weren't whispering, not exactly, but the anxiety was palpable. I smiled at them, but inside, my mind was spinning. Protecting them was no longer just about mentorship. It was strategy. I settled into my desk, laptop open, fingers poised over the keyboard. The investigation rumors were still circulating. HR had sent cryptic messages. Marcus had been vague, and whispers in Slack were growing louder. Every glance at my inbox felt like a ticking clock. And then came the first anomaly: a misdirected email from HR meant for someone else. It was small, a single line that hinted at dissatisfaction with my project deliverables, but it was enough. My instincts screamed. Someone was pushing a narrative against me. Someone wanted to see me falter. I printed the email, highlighted key phrases, and taped it to the wall in front of my desk. It was a breadcrumb, and I was going to follow it. By late morning, the first meeting of the day arrived. Not a standard team meeting, but a sudden, ad hoc session called by Marcus. The boardroom felt cold, sterile, the glass walls reflecting the fluorescent lights like a cage. He was already pacing when I arrived, clipboard in hand. "Shaniqua," he began, voice tight, "we need to talk about accountability. There are questions about your team's latest project. Can you explain the discrepancies?" I could see the subtext behind every word. Discrepancies meant doubt, doubt meant distrust, and distrust was the weapon they intended to use against me. I took a breath, anchored myself, and met his gaze. "Of course," I said calmly. "Let's review the numbers together. I'll walk you through the process from start to finish. Any discrepancies you think you see, we'll clarify immediately." As I spoke, I could feel the eyes of my team in the room. They were watching, waiting for me to crack. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. I pulled up the reports on the projector, explaining each figure, each calculation, each decision that had led to the final product. Step by step, methodically, I dismantled the insinuations, leaving no space for doubt. Marcus frowned, muttered something under his breath, but I could see the cracks in his narrative. My voice was steady, my facts precise. Every detail was a brick in the wall I was building around my credibility. By the time I finished, silence fell. Not a single question challenged the evidence. Not a single accusation landed. But I knew the game wasn't over. Corporate warfare rarely ended in a single meeting. Outside the boardroom, whispers continued, subtle sabotage creeping into the rhythm of the office. Files went missing, minor approvals were delayed, and casual conversations carried undertones that no one else seemed to notice but me. By mid-afternoon, I found myself in the library like quiet of the executive floor, scanning internal memos and logs. I had always believed in the power of preparation. Knowledge was my weapon. I traced every interaction, every unusual approval, every strange Slack thread. Patterns began to emerge, subtle but undeniable. A small faction in management had aligned against my team, possibly hoping to discredit me, to weaken our influence. My heart pounded with a mix of anger and determination. I leaned back, eyes closed for a moment. imagining what it would feel like to watch their plan unravel. But I didn't indulge. Emotion without action was useless. Every thought, every feeling, was a calculation. I began drafting a counter-strategy. Emails, evidence logs, ally lists. Every move I planned had purpose. Every action was precise. By the end of the day, my office felt like a command center. Sticky notes plastered the walls. Charts and spreadsheets scattered across my desk, and my notebook opened to a page labeled, Step 1. Identify the source. Step 2. Protect my team. Step 3. Build the narrative. Each step a promise. Each step a shield. The sun was setting, painting the city in gold and shadow. I stood by the window, letting the light wash over my face, thinking about the stakes. This wasn't just about a project or a rumor. It was about respect, about legacy, about showing the next generation of Black women entering corporate spaces that survival was not enough. You had to rise. And in that moment, I felt a surge of clarity. Whoever thought they could corner me hadn't counted on one thing. I was always 3 steps ahead. I wasn't just surviving, I was planning, observing, calculating, and ready to strike when the time was right. Tonight, I would go home, take a long shower, let the water wash away the tension. But I wouldn't sleep, not fully. My mind was alive with strategies, contingencies, and the first moves of my counterattack. Because the world of Haven Tech had underestimated me, and that was their first mistake. I scribbled a note in my journal. Control your narrative. Protect your people. Never, ever show fear. Then, for the first time in days, I allowed myself a small smile. The game had begun. The next morning, I walked into Haven Tech like I owned the place. Not in arrogance, but in calculated confidence. My heels clicked against the marble floors, a metronome of control echoing in the quiet lobby. Every step was deliberate, every glance, intentional. I wasn't just arriving at work, I was arriving at the battlefield. Emails flooded in, as usual, but I ignored them momentarily, focusing on the real intelligence, patterns, alliances, inconsistencies. My team noticed the shift immediately. They weren't sure what had changed, but something about the way I carried myself inspired more than just curiosity. It sparked hope. By mid-morning, I had pulled together the first pieces of my counter-strike. Small victories were key. I couldn't confront the full force of the opposition head-on yet. That would be reckless. I needed precision. I needed leverage. I started with subtle audits, following trails of suspicious approvals and missing documents, noting every anomaly. When I uncovered a chain of emails subtly shifting blame onto my team, I didn't react, not yet. Instead, I made copies, documented timestamps, and cross-referenced with project milestones. Each file became a weapon, each log a shield. My inner voice whispered, "This is not personal. This is chess." Then came the first real confrontation. Marcus, under the guise of mentorship, approached my desk. "Shaniqua, can I have a moment?" His tone was calm, too calm. I looked up, smiling politely. "Of course." He leaned in slightly, a predator cloaked in charm. "I've noticed some tension on your team. Some things are slipping through. I just want to make sure you're aligned with corporate expectations." Alignment. The word made my stomach twist. But I didn't flinch. I nodded, leaning slightly forward, voice steady. "Thank you for your concern. I've reviewed everything meticulously. If there's something specific you'd like me to address, I'm happy to go over it with you now." His eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of frustration before the mask returned. "Good. Keep me updated." And just like that, he walked away, unaware that I had already noted every word, every tone, every micro-expression. Each of them was a thread I could pull later. Lunch was a solitary affair. Sitting by the window with my notebook open, mapping allies and potential threats, I wrote down names, tendencies, patterns. Everyone had a role in this office ecosystem, some deliberate, some unintentional. I needed clarity before I struck. By mid-afternoon, I executed the first move in my counterattack. A misfiled report had been conveniently ignored, used as a subtle justification for criticizing my team. I corrected it, forwarded it to leadership, and included a detailed annotation trail. No finger-pointing, just facts, just evidence. just control. The reaction was immediate. Emails came back, surprised, almost defensive. I watched from my desk as whispers of uncertainty spread through the department. My actions were small, surgical, but effective. For the first time in weeks, the tide was shifting, not in my favor, but in mine. By the end of the day, I called a private meeting with my most trusted team members. They gathered around, eyes wide, curious, slightly anxious. I smiled at them, letting the weight of what I was about to say settle. "We've been tested," I began, voice low, firm. "We've been watched, second-guessed, and undermined. But that stops now. We have the facts, the evidence, and each other. Starting tomorrow, we don't just defend ourselves. We take control of the narrative." Their nods were subtle, almost imperceptible, but I could feel the energy shift. Fear was giving way to determination. Doubt was turning into resolve. And I, Shaniqua, would lead that charge. The real challenge wasn't just the opposition. It was maintaining composure while plotting a counterstrike that would be impossible to trace back to me. I felt the adrenaline course through my veins. But I kept it contained. Calm on the surface, fire underneath. That night, I stayed late. The office was nearly empty. The city lights outside casting long shadows on the floor. I opened my encrypted files, reviewing everything again. Every email, every approval, every whispered complaint. I created a dossier, a map, a playbook, and at the bottom of the page, I wrote a single phrase. "Timing is everything." I leaned back, hands clasped, staring at the ceiling. I imagined the look on Marcus's face when the first domino fell. Not anger, not surprise, but awe. He would realize too late that he had underestimated me. And my team, watching, learning, and trusting, would know exactly why I fought so hard. In that quiet office, surrounded by data, strategy, and determination, I finally allowed a small smile to form. This wasn't just about corporate politics. This was about proving that skill, intelligence, and integrity could not be sidelined by fear or bias. I shut down my laptop, gathered my things, and walked out, heels clicking. Outside, the night air was crisp, full of promise. The first moves were in motion. The counterstrike had begun. I arrived at Haven Tech the next morning with a purpose that felt almost tangible. The city outside was waking. But inside the building, the air was thick with tension. I could feel it, the subtle currents of anticipation, of uncertainty. Marcus would sense the shift. He always did. But today, the tide had turned, and I was the storm. The boardroom was silent when I entered. My team was already there, each person scanning the room nervously. I offered them a small smile, one that carried reassurance and unspoken promise. "Today," I said, voice steady, "we claim the truth." Marcus was at the head of the table, smirking as if he knew some secret I didn't. But I had prepared every dossier, every email trail, every subtle manipulation he'd attempted. It was all documented, organized, ready to expose him. My pulse was steady, but underneath, it roared. "This is it, Shaniqua, don't falter." He started with his usual charm, trying to disarm with a casual tone. "Shaniqua, I hope we can clear up some misunderstandings." His eyes flicked toward my team. A silent warning. I took a deep breath, letting the calm settle over me. "There's nothing to clear up," I replied, voice firm, unwavering. "What needs to be addressed is transparency. Let's review the facts, shall we?" I opened my laptop and projected the emails. The altered reports, the time-stamped approvals, each piece a silent witness to the manipulation that had plagued my team for months. Murmurs filled the room. Marcus's smirk faltered, replaced by a flash of something raw, unease. "You're mistaken," he said, voice tightening. "These are circumstantial." I didn't flinch. They're patterns, actions repeated, decisions skewed, and the consequences have been real. Look at the impact on the team. The projects, the deadlines. I've documented everything. One by one, my team stepped forward, confirming details, adding their observations. There was no anger, no theatrics, just clarity, professionalism, truth, and as the evidence mounted, Marcus's defenses crumbled. The room felt electric. I could sense the silent judgments forming from the executives on the side. Their eyes flicked between Marcus and me, Evaluating. Calculating. For the first time, the power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the target, I was the authority. Then came the pivotal moment. A senior VP spoke up, voice calm but carrying weight. "Marcus, these discrepancies are serious. We'll need a full review. Effective immediately. Shaniqua, your diligence has brought this to light. We appreciate your leadership." I nodded, a wave of satisfaction and relief washing over me. But inside, I remained focused, vigilant. This wasn't just about vindication. It was about setting a precedent, protecting my team, ensuring that manipulation, bias, and intimidation had no place here. After the meeting, as the room emptied, my team lingered, exchanging quiet smiles and words of gratitude. I could feel their respect and trust, tangible in the space between us. And in that moment, I realized how far we'd come, not just surviving the storm, but steering it. Later, back at my desk, I allowed myself a private breath. I leaned back, letting my mind replay the confrontation. I had faced Marcus, exposed the truth, and reclaimed the narrative. And yet, I knew the fight wasn't entirely over. Corporate politics never truly end. But now, I had the tools, the strategy, and the support to continue. I opened my journal, writing down the lessons of the day. Courage is quiet, power is disciplined, victory is earned, not demanded. And at the bottom, a single line, heavy with intent. This is just the beginning. The office lights dimmed as I packed up, the city outside alive with possibility. Walking through the lobby, heels clicking with measured confidence, I felt a surge of clarity. I wasn't just Shaniqua, the black woman who had endured. I was Shaniqua, the leader who had transformed adversity into triumph. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, the counterstrike had become a show of force. And as I stepped into the cool night air, I felt the thrill of inevitability. The corporate battlefield was mine to navigate. And I was ready for every move. Monday morning hit like a jolt of electricity straight to the chest. I stood outside the conference room, portfolio clutched tight, the leather edges pressing into my palms. Each document inside was a small bomb waiting for detonation. Emails, memos, reports, all pieces of a story no one had dared to tell aloud. And I, Shaniqua, was about to set it free. The elevator ride up felt like an eternity. I stared at my reflection in the polished metal doors, sharp suit, hair sleek, eyes blazing. It wasn't just confidence, it was purpose. Every day at Redwood had chipped away at me, shaped me, trained me for this exact moment. The late nights, the ignored suggestions, the subtle undermining, they were fuel. And now, it was time to ignite. As the glass doors slid open, a hush fell over the room. People paused mid-conversation, eyes flicking toward me. Marcus, of course, looked frozen, his usual swagger replaced by a tight, nervous edge. He had no idea I had been meticulous, calculated, and patient. He didn't see the storm brewing behind my calm facade. I set the portfolio on the table, flipped it open, and let the room breathe in the weight of anticipation. My voice cut through like a knife. "Good morning," I began, slow and deliberate, letting the silence stretch. "I want to talk about the decisions that have been shaping Redwood Global, decisions that have been hidden, misrepresented, and in some cases, downright harmful." Marcus opened his mouth, likely rehearsing a charming counterattack. But I didn't let him. I had the floor, and I intended to own it. I began with the emails, carefully threaded chains showing manipulated figures, decisions made without approval, resources diverted, and employee complaints buried. Each slide on the screen, each printed page passed around, carried the unmistakable weight of truth. The room shifted, subtle at first, then undeniable. The whispers rose into murmurs of shock and recognition. I told stories, not just statistics, but the human cost. There was Tara, a junior engineer whose career trajectory had been derailed by unacknowledged errors. Malik, whose team had been sabotaged by decisions no one would admit were theirs. I painted a picture of the domino effect Marcus had caused: departments strained, morale eroded, reputations quietly tarnished. Faces in the room grew pale. Some stiffened, others lowered their gaze. Reality was settling in. Marcus's mask faltered. I could see it. the slight twitch in his jaw, the flash of panic in his eyes. He tried to interject, stammering, but I was already moving on. Deliberate and relentless. Redwood deserves leadership that is accountable, that values honesty over convenience. I continued, voice firm, unwavering, and we will ensure it gets exactly that. The room was a living entity now, pulsing with awareness and anticipation. Colleagues whispered to each other. Pages rustled, phones clicked, and then, slowly, support began to ripple. Small nods at first, a quiet murmur, then rising into applause. Not for me, for truth, for integrity, for the courage to stand when no one else dared. I paused, letting the silence after the applause hang, giving gravity time to sink in. In those few heartbeats, I reflected on the journey here, the mentors who saw potential in me. The late nights coding under flickering fluorescent lights. My grandmother's voice echoing in my head. Keep going. Baby, you were made for this. Every obstacle had been a lesson. Every slight a test. And now, I had passed in a way that could not be ignored. Marcus attempted one last feeble defense. This is an overreaction. Misunderstandings. But the room cut him off. Eyes that once mirrored obedience now mirrored resolve. People had seen the truth. And truth, once fully revealed, demands acknowledgement. I moved through the room after the meeting, shaking hands, offering nods, small words of encouragement. Colleagues whispered thanks, admiration, disbelief, but I remained focused, thinking ahead. This wasn't a victory to gloat over. It was a foundation to build upon. Accountability couldn't be a one-time spectacle. It had to become culture. Later, in the quiet of my office, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The skyline stretched vast, the city alive and pulsing with possibility. I felt a surge of pride, tempered by responsibility. Every choice from here forward would be scrutinized. Yes, but now, I had leverage, I had support, and I had momentum. I glanced at my phone. Message from an old mentor. You did what I knew you could. Stand tall, lead with that fire. I typed back quickly. Thanks. But this is just the beginning. Because it was. The real work, the true shift in power and culture, had only just begun. Walking through the lobby, I felt the subtle looks of colleagues. A mixture of respect and newfound recognition. Every stride, every glance, was a small victory, and in that moment, I whispered to myself, a vow sealing itself in determination. This company will never forget the day Shaniqua made the invisible visible, and neither will I. By the time I stepped outside, the air crisp and sharp against my skin, I felt the pulse of the city sync with my heartbeat. Every light glinting off glass and steel seemed to echo back, power, transparency, justice. I smiled, silently, privately. The stage had been set, the pieces aligned, and the story now belonged to the truth, and to everyone I represented, those overlooked, underestimated, silenced. This was my moment, our moment, and I would carry it forward. Relentless, unshaken, unapologetic. Monday morning hit like a jolt of electricity straight to the chest. I stood outside the conference room. Portfolio clutched tight, the leather edges pressing into my palms. Each document inside was a small bomb waiting for detonation. Emails, memos, reports, all pieces of a story no one had dared to tell aloud. And I, Shaniqua, was about to set it free. The elevator ride up felt like an eternity. I stared at my reflection in the polished metal doors, sharp suit, hair sleek, eyes blazing. It wasn't just confidence, it was purpose. Every day at Redwood had chipped away at me, shaped me, trained me for this exact moment. The late nights, the ignored suggestions, the subtle undermining, they were fuel. And now, it was time to ignite. As the glass doors slid open, a hush fell over the room. People paused mid-conversation, eyes flicking toward me. Marcus, of course, looked frozen, his usual swagger replaced by a tight, nervous edge. He had no idea I had been meticulous, calculated, and patient. He didn't see the storm brewing behind my calm facade. I set the portfolio on the table, flipped it open, and let the room breathe in the weight of anticipation. My voice cut through like a knife. Good morning, I began, slow and deliberate, letting the silence stretch. I want to talk about the decisions that have been shaping Redwood Global, decisions that have been hidden, misrepresented, and in some cases, downright harmful. Marcus opened his mouth, likely rehearsing a charming counterattack. But I didn't let him. I had the floor, and I intended to own it. I began with the emails, carefully threaded chains showing manipulated figures. Decisions made without approval, resources diverted, and employee complaints buried. Each slide on the screen, each printed page passed around, carried the unmistakable weight of truth. The room shifted, subtle at first, then undeniable. The whispers rose into murmurs of shock and recognition. I told stories, not just statistics, but the human cost. There was Tara, a junior engineer whose career trajectory had been derailed by unacknowledged errors, Malik, whose team had been sabotaged by decisions no one would admit were theirs. I painted a picture of the domino effect Marcus had caused, departments strained, morale eroded, reputations quietly tarnished. Faces in the room grew pale. Some stiffened, others lowered their gaze. Reality was settling in. Marcus's mask faltered. I could see it, the slight twitch in his jaw, the flash of panic in his eyes. He tried to interject, stammering, but I was already moving on. Deliberate and relentless. Redwood deserves leadership that is accountable, that values honesty over convenience. I continued, voice firm, unwavering, and we will ensure it gets exactly that. The room was a living entity now, pulsing with awareness and anticipation. Colleagues whispered to each other. Pages rustled, phones clicked, and then, slowly, support began to ripple. Small nods at first, a quiet murmur, then rising into applause. Not for me, for truth, for integrity, for the courage to stand when no one else dared. I paused, letting the silence after the applause hang, giving gravity time to sink in. In those few heartbeats, I reflected on the journey here, the mentors who saw potential in me, the late nights coding under flickering fluorescent lights, my grandmother's voice echoing in my head, "Keep going. Baby, you were made for this." Every obstacle had been a lesson, every slight a test, and now, I had passed in a way that could not be ignored. Marcus attempted one last feeble defense. "This is an overreaction, misunderstandings," but the room cut him off. Eyes that once mirrored obedience now mirrored resolve. People had seen the truth. And truth, once fully revealed, demands acknowledgement. I moved through the room after the meeting, shaking hands, offering nods, small words of encouragement. Colleagues whispered thanks, admiration, disbelief, but I remained focused, thinking ahead. This wasn't a victory to gloat over. It was a foundation to build upon. Accountability couldn't be a one-time spectacle. It had to become culture. Later, in the quiet of my office, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The skyline stretched vast, the city alive and pulsing with possibility. I felt a surge of pride, tempered by responsibility. Every choice from here forward would be scrutinized. Yes, but now, I had leverage, I had support, and I had momentum. I glanced at my phone. Message from an old mentor. "You did what I knew you could. Stand tall, lead with that fire." I typed back quickly. "Thanks. But this is just the beginning." Because it was. The real work, the true shift in power and culture, had only just begun. Walking through the lobby, I felt the subtle looks of colleagues. A mixture of respect and newfound recognition. Every stride, every glance, was a small victory, and in that moment, I whispered to myself, a vow sealing itself in determination. This company will never forget the day Shaniqua made the invisible visible, and neither will I. By the time I stepped outside, the air crisp and sharp against my skin, I felt the pulse of the city sync with my heartbeat. Every light glinting off glass and steel seemed to echo back, power, transparency, justice. I smiled, silently, privately. The stage had been set, the pieces aligned, and the story now belonged to the truth, and to everyone I represented, those overlooked, underestimated, silenced. This was my moment, our moment, and I would carry it forward. Relentless, unshaken, unapologetic. The office was quieter than usual the next morning. But it wasn't silence born of peace, it was the stillness after a storm. People moved carefully, eyes darting toward me as if I carried some unspoken authority. And maybe I did. I had shattered the illusion, exposed the cracks in the system. And for the first time in a long while, Redwood Global was listening, truly listening. I walked past the glass-walled boardroom, watching Marcus sit at the head of the table, his hands clenched on the polished surface. I didn't feel triumph, not in that petty sense. I felt the weight of responsibility pressing into my shoulders. The fallout had begun, and every step I took from here would shape what Redwood could become. Emails flooded in, congratulations. Questions, whispers of collaboration. Some colleagues had been hesitant, unsure of how to navigate the new reality. Others, emboldened by the truth, approached with ideas, strategies, and even apologies. I realized in that moment, the fight wasn't just about revealing wrongdoing, it was about rebuilding trust, momentum, and vision. In my office, I spread out the documents from the previous day, reviewing every detail, every commitment. There were victories in here, policy reversals, reconsidered promotions, acknowledgments of errors, but there were also challenges. The board, even with evidence laid bare, would resist some changes. Systems don't shift overnight, power doesn't relinquish itself without struggle. And I, Shaniqua, had to be ready. I heard a knock, then Malik's familiar voice, "Shaniqua, got a minute?" I gestured to the chair, and he stepped in, his usual humor subdued, replaced by focus. The teams, they're rallying. They need direction. They need someone who won't let this momentum slip. I nodded, thinking of every late night I had spent coding, strategizing, navigating office politics as if survival depended on it, because it had. Then we give them that direction, I said, voice steady. We create a roadmap, and we stick to it. No shortcuts, no compromises. Hours blurred into discussions, planning sessions, and small victories. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years, the thrill of strategy, the rush of insight, the subtle acknowledgement of colleagues who had quietly supported me all along. I was no longer just surviving Redwood, I was shaping it, steering it toward accountability and fairness. By mid-afternoon, a quiet settled over the floor. I paused at the window, watching traffic below. Life moved in relentless rhythm, indifferent to corporate battles, personal triumphs, or injustices finally confronted. And yet, I felt deeply intertwined with it all. I had fought not just for myself, but for those who had been invisible for too long, the young black engineers, the overlooked associates, the unheard voices. My phone buzzed again, insistent, demanding my attention like the world itself couldn't wait. A new message from my mentor lit up the screen. "You've lit a fire that can't be ignored. Keep stoking it." I paused, staring at the words as if they carried more than just encouragement, they carried responsibility, expectation, possibility. I smiled, fingers hovering over the keyboard, and typed a reply almost instinctively. I plan to. This is just the beginning. Because it was. Everything I had endured, every sleepless night, every subtle slight, every whispered word of doubt I had faced, it all led here. Redwood's transformation wasn't a distant dream anymore. It was underway, and I was no longer a passive player. I was the spark, the architect, the witness to the birth of a new era of accountability. The office around me felt charged, alive in ways I hadn't noticed before. The faint hum of computers, the clatter of keyboards, the quiet shuffle of feet, it all seemed amplified. Each sound a subtle reminder that the gears of change were turning. I glanced at Marcus across the floor. He stood there, perfectly still, hands on his desk, jaw tight, his eyes flicked to me, then away. There was calculation there now, not defiance. The old game was over, and a new one had begun, and I had a hand in every move. As I packed up my bag for the evening, I noticed subtler signs everywhere. Colleagues I had barely exchanged more than a polite nod with offered warm smiles. Small acknowledgments that carried weight. Teams who had once avoided me now nodded respectfully, their eyes holding a newfound recognition. Even Marcus, his presence always looming, always threatening, was now tempered by caution. His stance measured, wary, as if he were walking on a tightrope I had carefully constructed beneath him. The dynamics of Redwood had shifted. The board was realigned, and I had placed every piece with deliberate care. Each move designed to spark change, to pierce complacency, to leave a mark that could not be erased. Stepping out into the night, the city breathed around me. The earlier drizzle had left streets slick with reflections of neon lights, creating a kaleidoscope beneath my heels. I drew a deep breath, letting the crisp air fill my lungs. My reflection in the glass doors shimmered with possibility. Shaniqua, the name that once floated anonymously on memos and office directories, was no longer just a title. I was a symbol, a reminder that persistence, intelligence, and courage could pierce through even the thickest walls of bureaucracy and ego. I felt a light touch on my shoulder, almost imperceptible at first, then firm enough to anchor me to the moment. Tara, her eyes were bright, glimmering with unshed tears, full of awe and relief. You really did it," she whispered, her voice trembling. I paused, meeting her gaze, feeling the weight of truth in her words. I pressed a hand gently to her shoulder, and said softly, "We did it, because this victory was never mine alone. Every quiet supporter, every colleague who risked reputation or comfort, every mentor who believed against the odds, they were all part of this moment. This change belonged to all of us." Walking home that night, heels clicking against the pavement, I let my mind drift. I thought of my grandmother's voice, fierce and unwavering even in the darkest times. "Keep going. Baby, you were made for this." I thought of mentors who guided me when the path was unclear, colleagues who risked silent opposition for a chance at justice. I thought of the battles still ahead, the skepticism, the inertia of old habits, the fragile egos that would resist change at every turn, but above it all, I felt hope, fierce, relentless, unshakable. Shaniqua had stepped into her power. Redwood had been shaken. Truth was no longer buried beneath layers of deception. And as I turned the corner toward my apartment, I felt it, a pulse deep in my chest, a rhythm that carried urgency, possibility, and destiny all at once. Hollywood might script climaxes with fireworks and applause. But this was different. Raw, real, alive, mine to shape. I paused at the edge of the street, looking up at the sky. Stars flickered faintly above, distant but unwavering, and below, the city lights stretched endlessly, each one a reminder of the countless lives moving through space and time. Every choice, every confrontation, every quiet moment of courage had led me here. I was ready to continue, ready to face the storms that would inevitably come, ready to guide Redwood through the winds of change. The storm had passed, yes, but the wind of transformation was just beginning to sweep through Redwood Global. And I, Shaniqua, would ride it, shape it, and never let it fade. The city pulsed around me, alive with possibility, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel fear. I felt power. I felt control. I felt alive. And somewhere deep within, I knew this was only the first chapter of a story that would demand everything I had, and more. Shaniqua's journey reminds us that change starts with courage and persistence. It's not about waiting for the system to shift, it's about stepping up. Using your intelligence, your voice, and your integrity to spark transformation. Even when facing towering egos, office politics, or hidden agendas, your commitment to truth and fairness can create ripples that grow into real impact. True leadership isn't about being in the spotlight, it's about lifting others, building alliances, and turning adversity into action. Shaniqua's story shows that one person's determination can reshape the culture of an entire workplace, inspiring respect, accountability, and opportunity for everyone. Like this story if you believe in standing up for what's right. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that persistence and courage matter. Comment your story below. Tell us about a time you turned obstacles into victories. Let's rise together.